Hi, everybody. During the lockdown, I have not been a regular attendant of this program much. To tell the truth, the fact is that I'm pretty clumsy with Zoom. I have trouble many times. The other day, on Monday, I have an event, 2 days event. I log in one day, okay, it's fine. The other day, I fail to log in. I still don't know how to do it. Okay, so it's a pleasure to meet all of you again here. Many of you are familiar faces. And uh, good afternoon for everybody else who may not be regular visitors here. Hi, Rachel. Uh, Another confession. This is the first time maybe Matthew Hunt and me have met. He said we have met somewhere in Bangkok before this, but this is the first time we introduced to each other. I knew him by, his article, his writing, but not in person. I visited his blog. He wrote a blog. After knowing his article, I visited his blog. Follow his blog for a while because it's interesting. But I have not met him until today, virtually. Matthew Hunt lived in Bangkok for the past 15, 16 years. Teaches English, doing many editing with online media and other jobs in Thailand. But he has graduated with degrees in visual culture, I believe with film studies in film. And that's what his blog is mainly about. At first, I didn't know him until while I was writing a book on the October massacre, October 6th massacre in 1976. The massacre is about the memory. I'm writing a book about the memory of the massacre in 1976, which has haunted Thailand for the past 40 years. One form of the haunting is in popular media, in novels, in cartoons, and in films. That's how I got into his article. He wrote a number of articles before that, not just October 6th. But I think his October 6th article, not long, it's not very long. It's very comprehensive, not only in terms of the list of titles, a brief summary or synopsis, but a brief but very thoughtful comments. So in a few dozen pages, I learned a lot. I have seen those some of those movies, but not all of them. Thanks to his article, I searched for many more, watched many more, and learned a lot more. Since then, that's what I try to find about him. So I found his blog. I found that he wrote about Thai films regularly over the years. And I like his comments. I like his again, thoughtful comments on those films, many times about books, not films, and social issues. All the time, I didn't tell him, of course. I didn't tell him, kind of in mysterious fan. Until, coming back to Madison, I thought that Friday Forum, we don't have many people talking about films. So I didn't even know the next week is about film again. So that's why I contact Mary, introduce Matthew that, hey, we better get this guy talking about Thai films. It happened that before that, shortly before that, a few months before that, he just released a book about film censorship in Thailand. That makes me even more interested in having him here. One more thing for the introduction, and I leave all of you to listen to his talk. During the lockdown, a year already, I have been at home almost 24/7, 7 days a week. Okay. I have to say that I enjoy Thai drama a lot. So watching a lot of Thai drama at home from YouTube, the first thing that annoy me so much in Thai drama is that Every time a bad guy show off pointing a gun, a pistol, the pistol will be blurred. Or the bad guy smoking, holding a cigarette, the cigarettes will be blurred. I remember they start blurring guns and cigarettes maybe more than a decade ago. When they started doing that, I thought, this is idiotic. Even the child knows that that's a gun, that's a cigarette. So how come you do this? So it will soon go away. No, it didn't go away. It hasn't gone. It stays for more than 10 years. Why won't you bring a gun? And a caveat is that if a police hold a machine gun, it won't be blurred. If the bad guy hold a machine gun, it won't be blurred. Maybe too big. Only a pistol will be blurred and cigarettes. So I think this is nonsense. So why is still blurred until today? So I have another last confession, Matt. I haven't read your book because I haven't got it yet. But reading the abstract, reading about what the book is about, I just talk about politics and ideology behind the Thai film censorship. If you could, you don't have to because it's maybe not in your preparation. If you could tell me why such idiotic things lasted more than 10 years already. Maybe you have some explanation. Otherwise, I will ask you again in the Q&A. Matthew Hunt, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the Center for inviting me. Thank you very much indeed to Dr. Tongchai for the introduction. Let me share my screen for the presentation. In answer to Dr. Tongchai's question of the guns and the cigarette, I don't think there is an answer. I don't know why, but it's even worse because it seems like if they're holding the gun, it's not censored, but if they point the gun at somebody, then suddenly the gun gets blurred, right? And then when they withdraw the gun is not blurred anymore, as if it miraculously transforms when it's being aimed at someone. It's very strange. Yes, this presentation is about politics and ideology of Thai film censorship. Yes, I wrote a book about Thai film censorship. It was published last year in Thailand, Thai Cinema Uncensored. It's coming from University of Washington Press. It should have been next week was the original, I think Monday was the original US publication date. I think that's been delayed because of COVID. But hopefully ASAP, it will be coming out in the US. It is available as an ebook as well. I wrote it because I think the story of film censorship in Thailand hadn't really been told before. Even in Thai, most of the writing on film censorship dates to before the rating system was introduced in 2008. There hasn't been anything extensively written about it since then. So in the book, I cover the history of film censorship in Thailand, but also particularly the changes that have happened under the rating system. And I'll talk a bit about those today as well. But also today in particular, I'm focusing on the politics behind film censorship, the reasons why the censors make the decisions that they make. I'll start with a brief history, starting in the 1920s. That was a time of absolute monarchy, before the 1932 revolution. And censorship was under the prerogative of the king at the time, King Rama VI. And the first film made in Thailand was Suwana Siam. It's not a Thai film, it's an American film but it was made in Thailand. It's the first film first feature film ever made in the country, and it's also the first example of film censorship in the country as well. And it's an interesting case because at the time, the king saw this film as a good opportunity for soft power, you know, to promote the country, especially to promote the modernization of the country, the infrastructure that was being developed, for example, to showcase the country. So the director was given access to royal palaces, to state buildings, etc., so that he could showcase those in the film. But also, he filmed the execution of a prisoner, and that scene was cut out. That's the first example of Thai film censorship. And you can see the quote from 1923, "The execution will represent the barbarism of Siam." So the reason it was cut out was because it was felt that this would reflect badly on the country. It would be bad for the national image. So it's an example of censorship to save face, and that's been a consistent trend, you know, over the subsequent 100 years of Thai film censorship, you know, from 1923 until now. And I have another example from 2007, the film Syndromes in a Century, and I'll talk much more about this film later because it's a really important film in the history of film censorship in Thailand. Syndromes in a Century, Apichatpong, Weerasethakul. This is a quote, a direct quote from the Board of Film Censors. Syndromes in a Century shamefully presents a negative image of Thai society for foreign audiences. Quote from the Board of Film Censors when they announced their decision to cut the film. But again, it's an example of censorship to save face, to protect the national image 100 years after Suwana of Siam. A very similar example, and even more recently, is the representation of the military in films made in Thailand. This is a quote from Tom Waller, who I think is in the audience at the moment. So hello, Tom. He's a director and producer, and he told me changing corrupt military characters from Thai to Burmese, that's normal when submitting a foreign film for approval. They don't want negative characters to sully the image and reputation of the kingdom. So again, the issue is about the national image being protected. I think it's fair to say that there is corruption in the Thai military. That might be an understatement, let's say, but it's not reflected on screen. The corrupt military characters are Burmese usually, or certainly they're not Thai, and that's a condition of being permitted to film in the country. This is an example from the film that Tom produced, Ninja 2, and you can see that the military characters have the insignia of the Burmese military rather than Thai. The first film legislation in Thailand was the Film Act of 1930, and that established the first board of censors, primarily composed of government ministers. And then in 1962, the Appeals Board was created. And this quote is from the Film Act of 1930. "It is prohibited to produce, show, or display at any theatre films or placards which violate or may disturb the public peace and jeopardize the public morale, or that has a tendency to cause such a result. Films or placards produced in this which contain such characteristics are prohibited to be exported." So two interesting points there. Firstly, it's a very, very vague general prohibition. Films which violate or may disturb the public peace and jeopardize public morale. That's a very broad umbrella description that could be used to apply to anything. And secondly, that films which contain such characteristics are prohibited to be exported. So again, the emphasis is on protecting the national image, that these films that are banned in Thailand, of course, they could not be shown within Thailand, but also they could not be shown outside of the country either. And then in 1972, censorship was passed from the government to the police. And the Board of Censors was dominated by senior police officers starting in 1972. And I have a quote from the director, Penek Ratanarowan, director of Ploy, which was censored in 2007. He said that at the premiere of the film, he told me that the cinemas were crawling with police because the police not only censored the film, but they also enforced the censorship. They would, to the extent of attending the screenings and checking the prints at the cinemas. But another problem with the police controlling the censorship is that they also control the representation of the police, just like the example about the military. Well, the same is true. The same was true for the police. So any scripts about police corruption, for example, would be censored, and so directors simply didn't make that kind of film because they knew that it wouldn't pass the censorship. There's one example, a famous example. There's a TV drama from 1994. The title translates as Chief Inspector. This is about a chief of police who sort of a crusader and exposes corruption within the police force. But it had to be, when it was broadcast, it had to be prefaced with an on-screen message to say that that this is pure fiction, that it's not based on reality. And also the series was stopped before it had finished. The last few episodes were never broadcast after complaints from the police department. Okay, I tried to pick out when the Film Act was modified, because the Film Act came into force in 1930, and it was finally superseded in 2008. But it was periodically modified and updated. So in 1936, there was a prohibition added to the Film Act. Films censored if depicting criminal activity or sexual relations. 1970, prohibition on films depicting unruly teenagers. So it seems like the censors were trying to keep up with the times, but they were not becoming more liberal. They were in fact becoming less liberal. And then after 1971, there's a correlation between military coups and increasing political censorship. So in 1971, there was a coup by Tanom. Eventually, that led to the 14 October 1973 protest. He launched a coup in 1971, and then very soon afterwards, his government introduced a prohibition on films depicting contempt for government or nation. And then 1976, the coup on the 6th of October, Dr. Tongchai, of course, mentioned his excellent book about that, published last year. Also, Dr. Tongchai organized the first commemorations of that event 20 years after it happened, and he distributed this documentary. I think was the first documentary about what happened on 6 October. But again, after the coup, the censorship regulations were changed, and there was a prohibition on films depicting political issues. And then 1991, another coup by Suchinda. This led to the Black May protests in 1992, but his government prohibited films depicting insults to the state. So, there is unfortunately, a long trend of military takeovers, followed very quickly by increasing political censorship. The film that was really the turning point was Syndromes in a Century, Apichatpong Weerasethakul's film, released internationally in 2006. And he submitted it to the Thai censors in 2007. And he was asked to cut 4 scenes. And you can see the photo at the bottom this is from a postcard that he gave out with every ticket from the original theatrical release. And the postcard has photos of the censored scenes and also links to YouTube videos, so you can see the clips, or you could see the clips online, the clips that were censored. Originally, there were 4 scenes that were cut. A group of doctors drinking whiskey, a doctor kissing his girlfriend, a monk playing guitar, and a monk playing with a remote control toy. So completely harmless, innocuous, nothing offensive whatsoever. And Apichatpong naturally, appealed against the cuts to the appeals board, and the appeals board not only upheld those 4 cuts, but they also required 2 more, so now 6 in total. And the 2 additional cuts were very brief shots of 2 royal statues. So it seemed, very, firstly, inexplicable, but also quite vindictive, why these cuts were required. And I have a quote from, again, this is a direct quote from the Board of Censors. The director disgracefully humiliates his parents' global audience. So an extremely patronizing statement by the censors. And I asked Apichatpong about this, and I asked him, why did he think he was targeted? And he said, I'm not really with a studio. Maybe they wanted some money under the table. He thinks that, and I think it seems to be the case that, if the film has distribution from a major studio, then it's less likely to be censored. Some deal can be done. But Apichatpong wasn't prepared to make any deals, either under the table or whatever. So he was targeted. But direct result of that, after the censorship of Syndromes in a Century, Apichatpong with the Thai Film Foundation to launch the Free Thai Cinema movement, this campaign that started in 2007. This is one of their t-shirts. And the campaign was to modernize the film censorship law, to introduce a rating system, and to introduce self-censorship industry. And this quote is from the petition that the campaign created online at the time. So they say that the censorship board still operates on the basis of antiquated legislation dating from 1930. So, the Film Act, the same Film Act had been in place all that time, for almost 80 years at that point. And in 2007, as they say in the petition, a new constitution was being drafted by the National Legislative Assembly. That's because, of course, a coup had just taken place in 2006. There are, as we know, there are regular events, and one had just happened, and so, of course, after the coup, the constitution gated, another one is drawn up. So the Free Thai cinema movement saw that as an opportunity to include new legislation relating to film in the new constitution, because under the previous constitution, the 1997 constitution, the media had been given protection from censorship, books, radio, television, and newspapers, but not film. So this campaign wanted to include film in that list. The result of that campaign was the Film and Video Act 2008, and the rating system was introduced finally. Before this, there had not been a rating system, so that means that anybody of any age could see any film in the cinema or could buy it on video. This act introduced a rating system, and you can see the ratings on the right here. The first one, the smiley face, is P for promotion. That's films that the Ministry of Culture feels should be promoted, and I'll talk more about that later. The second one, the house symbol, is G for general. That's any audience. And then we have the age restrictions, 13, 15, 18, 20. 13, 15, and 18 are advisory, but 20, for 20, you need to show ID. I guess 20 is the equivalent of NC-17 in the US. And also, also under the Film and Video Act, censorship was transferred again, this time from the police to the Ministry of Culture. On the Film and Video Act, if the Film and Video Censorship Committee considers any film as having content which undermines or is contrary to public order or good morals, or may affect the security and dignity of Thailand, the committee shall have the power to order an applicant to edit or cut off the scene, or may decide not to grant approval. So this is going back to the very vague language used in the original Film Act, or perhaps even more vague than the original Film Act, contrary to public order or good morals, or may affect the security and dignity of Thailand. Again, those are really catch-all terms, that could be used to apply to almost anything. And for the book, I interviewed 10 directors whose films had been banned or heavily cut. And many of them, when I asked them about their dealings with the censors, many of them told a very similar story, which is that the censors told them that the film was not acceptable, but they didn't tell them why. They just dismissed the entire film. So, for example, Tanska Pansitivorakun, his film, This Area is Under Quarantine, was banned in 2008. He told me they did not give any reason. They just said they cannot decide to show or not to show. And Tanhorin Sukapisit, her film Insect in the Backyard, was banned. She told me they simply said that they thought every scene was immoral. Nontawat Nambenchapon, his film Boundary, was banned. He told me that he was talking to one of the censors. He says, I asked her which part is sensitive. Can I know something about it? She told me, you cannot edit because it's the whole film. And there are other examples as well. So it seems that the censors were not really prepared to negotiate, not prepared to compromise, simply made the decision and then dismissed the film entirely. In the case of Taryn with Insects in the Backyard, she appealed, that was unsuccessful. Eventually she took the censors to court, but it took more than 5 years finally to get them to accept that there was just one 3-second shot that they objected to. And once that was removed, then the film could be shown. In the case of the last example, Nontowat's film Boundary, after the film was banned, he posted the news on Facebook and on various social media channels, and created a huge amount of publicity. And the censors called him a few days later and said, "Oh, sorry, we made a mistake. It's not banned after all. You just have to cut, I think, 1 or 2 seconds of audio from the beginning, and you can show the film." But I think if he had not made that announcement, then it would probably still be banned today. So the Film and Video Act transferred film censorship from the police to the Ministry of Culture. The problem is, though, that the Ministry of Culture is a very, very conservative, reactionary organization. Another director I interviewed was Ing Kanjanavanit, or usually known as just Ing K. She said that the Ministry of Culture is a Frankenstein's monster that they'd spawned. The ministry was created in 2002. It was created in consultation with various artists, photographers, filmmakers, but the result, unfortunately, was this very traditionalist, conservative organization. Second quote is from Apichatpong, talking about the drafting of the new Film Act. And he said that the new Film Act is likely to be the Ministry of Culture's version. We're making a pact with the devil. So when they were drafting the Film and Video Act, again, the Ministry of Culture did that in consultation with filmmakers. But ultimately, it was the Ministry of Culture who had the final say. And so, although they consulted with the film industry, the film community, ultimately, you know, those the film community's input was not really considered. And finally, this is a quote describing the purpose of the Culture Surveillance Center. This is one department in the Ministry of Culture, and this is how it describes its own purpose, which is providing immunity against cultural mutation and serving as a focal point of culture monitoring network dedicated to safeguarding of Thai cultural identities. So you can see that they're focusing on a very traditional definition of Thai culture and trying to preserve that as much as possible and to prevent it being changed or modified or modernized in any way. Another quote, this is from a Ministry of Culture official, anonymously. We still have to protect society. Some Thai films, like Syndromes in a Century, are very good, I'm sure, but Thai people may not yet be ready for it. And this is a consistent theme of people in authority saying that Thai people are, quote, not ready for something, not ready for change. Prayut Chan-o-cha said the same thing just after his coup in 2014. This is a quote from one of the weekly TV speeches that he gave every Friday, I think, in the months after the coup. He said, "We're living in a democratic world, but is Thailand ready? Are Thai people ready?" And another quote from a former Prime Minister, Anand, talking about the banning of the musical The King and I. He says, "I spent some time abroad, but most Thais could not separate the musical parody The King and I from the history of their own country." So again, it's a very dismissive attitude, very paternalistic, and very hierarchical. There is the Thai phrase, kundi, good people, that good people know what's best. And in this case, good people are the authorities, the establishment, and they should make the decisions because they know what's best for everybody else. A little bit more about the P for promotion rating. This is defined as films which promote learning and should be promoted to be watched. And this applies also to the funding of films. This is an example of the Ministry of Culture's Film Fund from 2010. So they had a total of 200 million baht, which was allocated to 49 films. But one film received half of the budget. The Legend of King Naresawan received 100 million baht. The other 48 films to share the other half of the budget between them. But this film, The Legend of King Naresawan, was a film by a major studio. It was also being supported by the finance ministry, I think, with even more money than this. It didn't need 100 million baht from the Ministry of Culture Film Fund. And when it was released, just after the coup, the military junta, the National Council for Peace and Order, gave away free tickets to the film. And they said that this film is about the patriotism of Thai people and reflects Thailand's culture and traditions and the respect and admiration of the Thai people for the monarchy, which is true. It does absolutely reflect those things, and those were the things that the junta felt should be promoted. And this film, The Legend of King Naresawan, is a really good example of the Royalist-nationalist history. Now, this is something that Dr. Tongchai has written about before. In particular, the film includes, this is the DVD cover, and I have the picture of the poster, a dramatization of the elephant duel of 1593 between King Naresawan and the Crown Prince of Burma. And this is sort of the apogee of royalist nationalist history, Thailand's victory over an enemy, as represented in this film, and even also in a cartoon, Khan Kloy, a children's cartoon. This was the first 3D animated film in Thailand. In America, it was released as The Blue Elephant. And the pictures at the bottom come from this cartoon. You can see on the left, the blue elephant, that is King Naresawan's elephant in the duel. Cute, cuddly, friendly, the hero of the film. And on in the middle is the Crown Prince's elephant in the same film, and he has red eyes, demonic eyes. So the film has a very jingoistic message, but also a very nationalistic message as well. Okay. There have been several attempts to make films about military leaders and politicians, but they've always been unsuccessful for some reason. So here is a list of unfinished, unreleased films about political figures. Firstly, a quote from Apichatpong. This is from an op-ed that he wrote in 2007. Will we ever see a movie about Pibun Songkram and his dictatorial rule? The answer to the question is, at least so far, is no. In 1988, the director Yutana Muksanit tried to make a biography, a biopic of Pibun. He had to cancel the film to avoid a defamation charge. And as Dr. Tongchai mentioned in the introduction, there is a case even now of censorship by defamation. His article in New Mandala is about this book. The writer is being sued for defamation. And in Thailand, defamation is a criminal offense, not just a civil offense. And so the penalties can be very high. But also defamation is used as a weapon to silence critics. Another example, in 2002, there was a proposal to make a biopic of Salit, another Cold War dictator. That script was rejected by the censors. And then recently, 2017, a documentary called The Frenemies about Pibun and Pridi. The documentary was cancelled in post-production. I spoke to the director, and he said that the investors got cold feet and they pulled out, so he could not finish the film. And finally, the politician, where are we? Yeah. Finally, the politician Weerasethakul made a film about a fellow politician, Samak Sundarawed. Samak was one of the agitators on 6 October. He was a mayor of Bangkok. He was also a prime minister later in life. The censors asked for 18 cuts to the film, so Veer decided not to release it. He also wrote a book with the same title. The photo is the book cover. And in the book and also in the film, he changed Samak's name, but you know the biographical details are pretty obviously about Samak. It's just the name that was changed. Another theme from the interviews that I did with the 10 directors was this concept of Sawang, political awakening, like opening your eyes to what is happening in Thai politics, becoming sort of politically conscious for the first time. And most of the directors that I spoke to said they experienced this in the last 10 years or so. So I have some quotes from these 4 directors who all had the same experience after the red shirt protests in 2010 and after the coup in 2014. All of these directors said they started to become aware of politics for the first time, and also they started to make more political films which touched on politics for the first time in their careers. And 2 more examples. Penek Ratanaruang. He made the documentary Paradoxocracy, it's hard to say, Paradoxocracy, about the political history of Thailand. Dr. Tongchai is one of the interviewees in that documentary. Covers Thai political history. But what's missing from that documentary are the Black May protests of 1992, the red shirt and yellow shirt movements, and the 2006 coup, because the people involved in all of those things, were still politically active. And I think, again, he was concerned about possible defamation. And Weerasethakul again started to make increasingly political films. His film Fatherland has been on hold on the shelf since 2013. It was funded by the military. The military were expecting essentially a propaganda film, but that's not the film that he made. His film is about the insurgency in south of Thailand. In the film, he accuses the military of perpetuating the insurgency, because as long as the war continues, the military receives more funding. So the military withdrew their support, and he has not been able to release the film. He also made a film last year called Seven Boy Scouts. The seven Boy Scouts in the title, they all have the same names as seven well-known politicians, and each Boy Scout represents one of the seven deadly sins. And he's finished the film, I think. I haven't seen it, but I've seen the ending, but I haven't seen the whole film. But he did show me the ending. But again, it's on hold because his distributor pulled out at the last minute. So films with direct political themes are very hard to make. So instead, some directors use codes and metaphors instead and make indirect references to the monarchy, the military, and politics. These are two examples from Tunska Pansiti Vorakun. The first one is a music video he directed, Remember. And you can see in the top right corner, there's a series of numbers, right? 1721955. Or is it? I can't even see myself. I think, yeah. That's a reference to the date when 3 men were executed for the assassination of King Rama VIII. So that's something that you could not talk about in a film directly. So he makes this sort of cryptic coded reference in the music video. And at the bottom is the title screen for his film Kiss. But the title is written KI space SS. And you can see the typography SS is the same typography as the German SS. And I can't really explain what KI is, but think of a 4-letter word that would be political, that would be very sensitive in Thailand, that begins with KI. It's a reference to that. And Tanska told me that he wants to say something about politics and royalty, but he's living in Thailand, so he could not say it directly. And the second quote is from Apichatpong. He told me that for politics, there is very little censorship because people automatically don't create it. There is so much self-censorship on the part of writers and artists and directors. Okay, I'm coming to the end now. these are two examples where the whole film is a metaphor. There are not just hidden codes, but the whole film is a metaphor. Someone from Nowhere and Mundane History. Someone from Nowhere, a man and a woman are arguing over who is the rightful owner of an apartment unit. The woman claims that she is the owner. The man says that she is an imposter. And as the director explains in this quote, the apartment represents space like a community or society or nation or country. So the woman represents civilian governments. You could argue specifically Yingluck Shinawatra, who was prime minister at the time. The man represents the military. And Anosha's film Mundane History, in this film, is about the relationship between a father and son. The son is paralyzed. The father is very authoritarian, very distant. And she says the conflict mirrors the conflict between those in power and the citizens of my country. So the son, who is paralyzed, represents the powerless citizens. The father represents the authority, let's say. And finally, the most recent protest movement, a new protest movement started last year and has continued on and off until this year. It started with the dissolution of the Future Forward Party, the beginning of last year, and the abduction of Wanchalam Satsaksit last summer. That led to protests by students. And last August, the protesters issued a manifesto of 10 points calling for the reform of the monarchy. And the riot police have responded with water cannon and tear gas. And a few weeks ago, they used rubber bullets on the protesters for the first time. And this situation has made the authorities here quite paranoid, I think. The documentary, The Kingmaker, was going to be screened last August. This is a documentary about Imelda Marcos. It has no content about Thailand. It's an American documentary about Imelda Marcos. And you can see in the pictures, firstly, the poster for the film. Now it has a Thai tagline, but this is the international poster. The same poster was used everywhere. And at the bottom, this is a picture I took of Queen Sirikit, the Queen Mother's portrait outside a shopping mall. And you can see there's a similarity, but it's a coincidental similarity. But the authorities were concerned this film was somehow criticizing the Queen Mother, which it wasn't. And there were 2 screenings planned, and the local authorities pressured the venues to cancel the screenings. So this represents, of course, an overreaction by the authorities, but also it's ironic because each venue had a capacity of 11 people, and there were only 2 screenings planned, so would have seen this film. But because of the pressure from the authorities, this made international headlines, and there were reports that this film was banned in Thailand. Now, it wasn't banned officially, it was just pressure from these local authorities, but of course they drew far more attention to the film by pressuring the views. If the screenings had gone ahead, perhaps just a couple of dozen people would have seen. And finally, music videos that increasingly mock the authorities. So far, there are no films about the protest movement too soon. There have been music videos inspired by the protests. The most famous one is My Country Has by Rap Against Dictatorship, released in 2018, hugely popular. It became an anthem for anti-military protesters. And the picture on the left is from a video. The video also makes very direct reference to the 6th October 1976 massacre. And that song and video was criticizing the military junta at the time. But Rap Against Dictatorship's latest song and video is called Reform. The title is a reference to the Reform the Monarchy campaign by the protesters, and the song and the video make direct reference to the monarchy. You can see the second picture here is from the video for Reform. So they've gone from criticizing the military government to commenting on the king directly. And that video, the video for was filmed at the protests last year. The man you can see there, Ami, the lead singer with the Bottom Blues, was one of the protesters. He's now been arrested. He was arrested a week or two ago for burning a portrait of the king. And final example, a song by Peng Surachet. There's no English title for this song, but the title translates as very brave, very good, thank you, which was a quote from the king to one of his supporters on a walkabout last year. Three screen grabs from the video on the right. And the song seems to be a message from someone to their former lover. It seems like someone is breaking up with their lover because their lover was unfaithful. I'm not sure if you can read the lyrics. They might be quite small. The text is quite small. Got to admit, it was good fully all these years. Now my eyes are fully open. I can't see the bottom one, it's off the screen. Thanks for everything, but I'm not going to love you again. So that could be from maybe letter to an ex, or a reference to something else. And in fact, it's a reference to something else. I mean, the title gives that away. And the background, the yellow ducks, the riot police use water cannon against the protesters, and the protesters protect themselves with inflatable yellow ducks. And the two angels, and the picture is quite small, but there are two angels in the background. Those are two of the leaders of the protests. On the left is Rung, or rainbow. On the right is parrot, or penguin. They're both also now in custody, facing His Majesty and sedition charges. Okay, I think I've overrun a little bit. I apologize. I should finish there.
Thank you very much, Matt. I think Matt has given us kind of whole landscape of the political themes about second half of his talk. The first half is more about the censorship law, film censorship law. I'm still looking at the chat. If there is anybody who wants to ask question, please post the question. So in the meantime, may I start asking while people are, jumping into post more questions, may I ask Matt a few questions first? Matt, when you talk about 3 or 4 films that has been banned entirely, but after appeals, they got permission to show after a few cuts, actually. Does that fact reflect that the censors themselves are not very ideological? Perhaps they are just simply lazy. Okay, that's the first question.
Okay.
I'm not sure, or maybe both are connected. The second question, you talk about reaction to censorship in general in 2 ways. On the one hand, the second half of the talk, you mentioned a lot of political themes, the different ways producers and directors try to avoid censorship. But at the same time, you mentioned so briefly about self-censorship, right? So how can you give us a better sense? I know that both must be correct, both must be true, but let's say, to what extent the consequences of censorship have been on the film industry to the point that self-censorship prevailed, or resistance is pretty much alive, that kind of binary. But I know it's not fair. So 2 questions.
Well, I think are the censors ideological or are they lazy? I think if they were lazy, then they would just, they wouldn't make a fuss. I guess it's easier to pass these things. It's if they ban something or they cut something, they know there's going to be a reaction. They know it's going to be publicized. They know there might be an appeal. So I think that shows their sort of ideological zeal, rather than laziness. I think it would be better if they were lazy. That would be a lot better, right? Because then they perhaps wouldn't censor so much. And self-censorship, yeah, I mentioned it very briefly. Yeah, yes, it's I couldn't put everything into a single presentation. But yes, self-censorship is a huge problem in the film industry, but also in journalism, in art as well. Some of the directors I spoke to have said, that there are things they would like to say, but they know that, of course, it would be cut. Not only it would be cut, but they would be, they would face lèse-majesté charges as well. So there's a very strong impulse to censor themselves. Although Apichatpong told me that he has now decided that enough is enough. That's why he's now working outside Thailand. He's making his first English language film to avoid the need to self-censor within Thailand.
Mary, you have a question, or because I don't see?
No, it looks like there are actually people are raising their hands, and we have a question in the chat box from Tyrrell, but I would like to let the people with their hands raised go first, and then we'll get to Tyrrell's question.
Help me, because I'm not sure I can do how to do the Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So let's just call on 3 people with their hands raised and then move to the box. So our first person is Sajirat Palakan, and he is waiting with his question.
Thank you so much for giving the talk about Thai film censorship. It's very interesting. I seem to detect a lot of basically, you call it self-censorship, but in this sense, the censor themselves are doing a kind of self-colonization in the way of basically creating a colonial gaze that the presentation of a perfect land or civilized land based on these three like tenant, I guess, like the military, the Buddhist, the royalty. But I was wondering, I've seen, and right now I'm actually reading a book called The Wind-Up Girl by Pablo Bacalauchi, and I've seen like movies that depict Thailand, like Only God Forgive or The Hangover Part 2, which is funny. But it's not a funny book movie, but anyway. In those films and in the Western media surrounding Thailand, it's always depict like Bangkok and Thailand as a debauched, run place full of prostitutes and violent gangs and stuff like that. And while I can understand that the censors themselves do not have power over international media, what is their view on this? I guess like this connection between how the self-representation is trying to promote and this like international media they're just basically, I guess, depicting Thailand as extremely debauched place.
Well, I think, yeah, as you say, they have little control, except when films are within Thailand. There have been cases like Detective Chinatown was about a sort of a comedy about a very, as you say, debauched character, and that was prevented from being screened. Again, it wasn't banned officially, but screenings were prevented. There are other examples as well of foreign films depicting Thailand, again, that they've not been banned officially because probably that would generate too much publicity. But again, cinemas have been approached and quietly asked not to show them. So I think this is a concern. And also I mentioned the cultural surveillance unit, is very active and, very concerned about the sort of representation of Thai culture. But it's kind of, it's fighting a losing battle, as you say, because there are so many foreign films that depict Thailand in that way.
Mary, next question. Next person.
Yeah, so we have another raised hand from Bob Bickner. And wait, hold everything. Bob Bickner has a new book out, and I just want to put it in the chat. Very exciting, and he will be giving a Friday Forum lecture for us in the fall on that book, The Story of King Law, Lilit Pra Law. So that's just an announcement for him. Here it comes. And Bob, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I'm mute. Video is turned off, but that's okay. Just the gravity of censorship and the real motivation behind some. Oh, by the way, Matthew, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I enjoyed all of what you had to say. You brought me really up to date on what's been going on. So thank you for that. But I recall when I first understood what censorship was about in 1990 or 89 or 1990, when my wife and I were living in Thailand, and we went to see in a Thai movie theater the American film A Fish Called Wanda, which was a parody of a heist movie. It was all very broad comedy. And John Cleese is trying desperately to seduce Jamie Lee Curtis as one part of the side plots of the movie. And he thinks he's getting to the nub of it. It's going to happen. I'm going to get with her. And you can see his glee is played for very broad laughs. But in the version that was shown in the theaters in Thailand, there's just a little teeny jump in that scene in which he's about ready to make his conquest, and suddenly he's embarrassed by having the owners of the house that he's borrowed show back up unexpectedly home, and it's all off. And it was to to me, as a somebody who's accustomed to American movies, I was able to see the omission very easily. And I could not figure out what it was that they could have shut out until I happened to see the movie on a plane flight into Bangkok one day, years and years and years later. And it was the Cleese character having finally removed the last piece of clothing, his briefs, the underwear that Thai people refer to as kung ging ling. And he was dancing around the room with nothing else on but his underpants up over his head as though they were kind of crown. And that was what was cut out of the movie. And that was it. It was just a man putting his underpants on his head. And the offense to I could just imagine the offense to some Thai lieutenant or major in the army, or whoever, who was assigned to this without any training at all, just told to protect Thai culture. And the thing that he chose to protect was the idea of a man putting underpants on his head. That's the gravity behind some of what happens in this censorship. The political things and all that, that's much more recent, and that's much worse, of course. But the underlying nature of the attitude, I think, was revealed very clearly, to me at any rate, in that clip from A Fish Called Wanda. A silly and fluff piece that they felt they had to be changed. So thank you, Matthew. I don't know if that's worth anything to add to the conversation, but thanks again for your great talk.
Sure. It's a great film and a great scene. And there are many examples of foreign films either being cut or simply not being shown. You know, as I say, I've lived here for quite a few years, and you know, you would see posters for a film or trailers for a film being shown. They would have the release date at the bottom, and then that date would come and the film wouldn't be shown because the censors had required cuts and the foreign studio didn't want to make the cuts, and so the film simply wouldn't be released. That happened over and over again. Or in the case of A Fish Called Wanda, you know, I guess in that case the studio agreed to make the cut, but I think that's the exception. Usually in those cases, the censors would ask for cuts and the studio would refuse, and so the film simply wouldn't get distribution.
Mary, can I allow Palita Junsangjan to speak?
Well, she can just jump in, but
we have stream at Minnesota.
Okay, and then we'll move to the chat box.
Thank you so much, Ajahn Hongchai, and congratulations on this monograph, Matthew, and thank you so much for the wonderful talk. It is such an important topic right now, and one thing that I was struck by was actually the very last portion of your presentation, which is about the protests in Thailand, which is, you know, like the sort of urgency of this matter. So I'm really happy to see that right there. So thank you so much for that. And also because I already had a question about the current media infrastructure, like the digital media form, and I was just wondering, trying to look for the table of contents of your book, which I already pre-ordered, like how I guess like my question was like, do the directors whom you interview have any comments on these platforms at all? Perhaps consider them more as a potential liberatory space? Because in a way, the global trend right now is to for liberal politics, right, and representation. It seems like you know, the Anglophone Hollywood or whatever is trying to move to other geopolitical region in order to kind of produce more films, but for some reason, like I don't really see that sort of investment in film production on that sort of streaming platform like Netflix and things like that. Yet one could argue, right, that these sort of pirating sites or like YouTube actually is now available for that sort of intervention and disruption of the state censorship. So I guess I was wondering if you could comment more a little bit about that, whether or not your work sort of explore this tendency, and also how do you think the sort of quote unquote conservative standpoint of film censorship in Thailand would survive, right, in this sort of global liberal politics and let alone this sort of anti-institutional sentiment in the nation state right now? Thank you so much.
Sure. In terms of digital platforms, the only concrete example I have is Weerasethakul. I mentioned about his film Fatherland. He's been trying to get that released in some form for the last 8 years, and I know right now he's in discussions with Netflix about that. I've seen like a director's cut, but Netflix wants a shorter version of the film, so he's editing the film at the moment with a plan to release it on Netflix. And also his film 7 Boy Scouts, which I think he has now finished, although I haven't seen the whole thing. Again, he's hoping for either a Netflix release or some form of digital release. If not Netflix, then he plans to, I think, to release it himself online somehow. The problem of piracy, that was a problem specifically for Apichatpong with his film Cemetery of Splendor, which was shown, of course, in cinemas in other countries, and it included one scene of an audience in a cinema standing up, and now in Thailand, of course, you stand up for the royal anthem before film screenings. In the film, they stand up to silence. The anthem is not played, and although that scene was included in the theatrical release in other countries, Apichatpong decided to cut it from the streaming version and from all DVD and Blu-ray versions, precisely because he thought that there was a danger that that digital version could be pirated within Thailand, and that he would face charges as a result of that. So in fact, you know, he's more careful when it comes to digital distribution. And another director, Tunska Pansitiborakun, feels the same way. Again, he tries to avoid that kind of distribution because it could lead to potential problems. Of course, there's the Computer Crime Act, you know, which has very severe penalties. Can this conservative system survive? I don't think we can predict. I mean, this time last year, we could predict, you know, the direction that the protests have gone in. You know, if you asked me last year, would there be protesters directly calling for reform of the monarchy? Would there be music videos like the ones I mentioned at the end, making direct references to the monarchy? I would have said absolutely not, but it's happened. So I don't know is the answer. I'm sorry. I wish I did.
Okay, Matt. May I allow ask the audience for about three more minutes, and we end by 1:30. There is a question from the chat from Al, asking that is many films from Asian countries now spread all over the world, but somehow Thai films is a bit unknown. Is that the result of censorship, in your view?
Yes, I'm reading that question now as well. I don't think so. No, I don't think so, because again, some of the films that I mentioned, although they have not been shown in Thailand, or not even sometimes not even submitted to the censors in Thailand, they have received international distribution. I mentioned Tunska, for example. After his film was banned in 2008, he has refused to submit any of his subsequent films to the Thai censors, and he just doesn't release them in Thailand anymore. He just releases them overseas. And now Apichatpong as well, you know, is making Memoria. And who knows whether that will be shown in Thailand. I don't think that's a priority for him. Similarly, his last film, Cemetery of Splendor, again, did not get an official Thai release. It was not submitted to the Thai censors. But they can, yes, perhaps less than other Asian countries, absolutely. I mean, Alfred mentions, yeah, Japanese, Chinese films, Indian films, and they have, certainly Japan, China, India have, you know, well-established international distribution since, you know, since the 1950s in the case of Japan and India. International distribution for Thai films didn't really start until the beginning of this century, until sort of the very late 90s, early 2000s.
If I may intervene, do you think it's not a distribution or mechanism or distribution problem? Do you think it's a problem of creativity, problem of development of film industry, not just into mechanical development, but more like how much it has been improved, better, developed, and make it interesting to the world, to the global audience? Is censorship affect the way Thai film has been done?
Yes, perhaps because, you know, because directors don't feel that they have the freedom to make the films they want to make. Yeah, and especially because of self-censorship. Yes, but you know, there have been some very very creative and internationally successful Thai films. Perhaps they are the exceptions, I guess. But a director, again,
yeah,
sorry.
Maybe one may argue that because censorship, creativity is even better in a different way. Okay,
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely, yeah.
We run out of time, but the last word I would say that interestingly, self-censorship somehow in the media today, not about film, self-censorship is so effective and resistance within the media has been so almost none. That surprised me. I'm not to lead to another issue, but just leave it here as a question. Somehow Thailand rules in the area of media and culture, not only by force or not necessarily by force. Somehow they effectively impose self-censorship to the extent that some areas such as the media, it very much virtually no resistance.
Yeah,
That's interesting. So that's why I want to know to what extent it happened in the film industry compared to the media. But that should be the subject for next time.
Okay.
So for Matt, we continue to talk a few more minutes after this. But otherwise, for everybody else, thank you very much to Matthew Hunt to introduce us to censorship of film in Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Just to let you know, we have a couple questions in the chat box that you might want to answer for people who'd like to stay on. And we have a lot of comments, very positive comments about how much people enjoyed your talk. So people can stay on for a few minutes to hear a little bit more discussion, although I know it's very late in Thailand right now, so we won't keep our speaker on for too long. But don't miss next week's talk, and also don't forget that we have this film discussion for Grace Simbulan's film this evening, happening shortly.
Okay, so the session has ended. Thank you very much. So I just asked a few more minutes. Mary, we continue to talk a few more minutes. I want to talk to Mike, to Matt.
Absolutely, sure. Can we ask Tyrrell's question just so people can hear it?
Sorry?
Can we ask Tyrrell's question just so we can hear it?
Good question. Sorry, we don't have a time. Please. Matt, do you see Tyrrell? Question?
Yeah, so I can read it out loud.
Yes, yeah, I can see it.
You want to read it yourself? Yeah, go ahead.
About, oh, I'm speed reading it now. I'll just read it and then I'll read it at the same time, maybe. The most compelling category, the unfinished, unreleased projects, the range of reasons for their incomplete status. If the range of what can be said and sold offers one vision of time and time politics, what is the vision that emerges from the incomplete projects? Does it constitute a site of opposition or a record of opposition? Do they circulate anywhere? They do circulate, but on a very small scale. I mentioned Fatherland. He was trying to show it for 8 years. He did have one screening on 14 October last year, like a midnight screening in the basement of the 14 October memorial, but a very, very, very low-key screening. Tunska, all of his films since 2008, he's had like an invitation-only screening, just one screening for each film, only inviting, you know, people he knows. Again, very sort of under the radar. The others, Shakespeare Must Die, had one screening. It was not advertised. In that case, the director is the owner of a cinema, the Cinema Oasis. So, but even if she's the owner of the cinema, of course, she can't show the film because it's still banned. But she can show it if she doesn't advertise it, and only to members of the cinema. So she did that just once, I think maybe 2 years ago. So they get some circulation, but very limited.
Sorry. Thank you. And then we have one last fairly quick question from Nicholas Hudson Ellis, and you can see that there as well.
Yeah, hello, Nicholas. We're good friends. Memoria will ever be screened in Thailand. If I had to bet, I would bet on no, because I think probably Apichatpong wouldn't even want it to be shown. I don't think that is his priority. You know, he told me that he's really not interested in trying to, you know, play by the rules of the Thai system anymore. And you know, his last film he didn't show in Thailand. Again, he had one screening, Cemetery of Splendor. He did have a screening at the Film Archive just one time. Again, it was like an invited audience only. He may well do the same thing for Memoria. I doubt very much that he would want it to be on general release. I don't think he would want to show it in Bangkok specifically. He may show it at the Film Archive, which is outside Bangkok, but not, I think not a commercial release. I would doubt that.
Jampalita, do you have something to ask Mike? By the way, this is a Jampalita, Professor. I didn't know her until recently. I searched out about Thai films and know that she wrote a thesis on Mithwana. That's it. And then I read it, not all, a few chapters. That's how I sent the poster, the email from the center to her. You have a question to Matt or anything to say, please?
Larry also has his hand raised.
So yeah, for a second, it doesn't allow me to unmute, but no, I was really fascinated, especially with more of like ethnographic work, I guess. And thank you, Dr. Thongchai, for bringing that up, because that was one of my chapter in my dissertation contributes, like all of it was about Miss Suvarna of Siam and film diplomacy. So eventually, like I was trying to think more or less just in the aspect of Ajahn Thongchai's too, like there was within the nation, there's royalist sort of historiography that we need to dismantle to some degree, one might argue, but also like Thai cinema is always already like transnational in a way since Miss Suvarna of Siam. So that's why all the questions that I had for you was were like all the questions were anchored towards that sort of distribution outside Thailand too, right? And it was really interesting to listen to the interviews that you made of Apichatpong and how he now think that, you know, there's not much for me available, right? And actually I saved one question that I was really curious to actually ask the participants as well, like how is it necessary that we dismantle or like have a revolution or a reform on the level of institutional politics first? Because then how can we even move or have the mobility within the creativity that Ajahn Thongchai and Matthew mentioned at all, right? Like that's why I'm thinking forward, but I'm also stuck, and this panel has really helped me kind of gain back that sort of hope and momentum. Yeah.
Larry, anything to say? Hi.
Yeah,
Larry.
actually, I wrote it in the chat to you, Matthew.
Oh,
Nice to
Oh,
meet
okay. Let me take a look.
you. I'm the librarian here for Southeast Asia, and
Okay.
I don't always get all the films, but I'm particularly wondering if there's a way you could help us get some of those unreleased films.
Wow. Well, I mean, I can ask the directors, of course, absolutely, yeah.
Because I have a new way to get things from Thailand, a very reliable vendor, not commercial vendor in the sense of, you know, White Lotus or the DK or, you know, something like that. It's a personal situation. Cornell uses the same person, and I finally decided this Thongchai knows to use that person. And I think all we'd have to do is, if we had it, we would pay for them if they wanted, you know, charge us something through her, and she would just get them and she would send them to us along with the books that we order. Would that
Larry,
be
Larry,
doable? Is that doable?
is it doable, Matt?
Go ahead.
Well, I would need to ask the directors and see what they say. It's possible. Yeah, sure, it's possible. I think the examples, those as you mentioned, the unreleased films, they're mostly independent films, so there wouldn't be an issue with you know, rights from studios. It would it would depend on the directors themselves.
Right,
but
right.
I can certainly make the request. Yeah.
I think you're kind of the right person to do that because you have made the contacts already with these people, right? If I just write them, you know, sure, I could say who I am, but they don't know who I am necessarily.
Let's continue this connection, because I just want to say that, Larry, great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea. Collections of incomplete or unreleased films in Southeast Asia, starting with Thailand. I think this is great collection. It will be great collection.
Well, I look at it, you know, in the simple context of, if you don't collect them now when they're available, then they might be unavailable, right? And that's part of my job, to collect things as they are available.
Maybe we can put it in our Title VI grant.
Right, but if I ask the Library of Congress to do this, no, that won't work. The Library of Congress has a program for Southeast Asia, but that's not going to work in this case.
But this is great idea. So keep the contact, and Matt, think about it. Maybe Larry, you contact you directly how to do. If you can, or if you need help, find somebody in Thailand who agree with this idea. At least have some collections of incomplete or unreleased films. Here in Madison is good. Don't worry about people in Thailand have access or not. Now they can access. And in Madison, we have collected some material which have not been available in Thailand years ago. Communist Party collection is not easy to access. We have it. Now they are available in Thailand, so easier. So do like that.
So, Mary, we have Matthew's contact information. You can pass on to me, or should I look it up?
Absolutely, if that's okay. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Let's definitely keep the conversation going, and you guys can be in touch, and we can talk to Mike about it, who's still on, and Ian. So, I'm going to wrap things up because I want to let everybody go. And I know people have places to be and sleep to get. So thank you again for a terrific talk. Thank you for being with us. And thanks, Tongchai, for a really great introduction. And thank you, everybody, for being there.